Andrew, good to be back. Feels like it's
It is.
been a while.
It's indeed good to be back. Yeah, delighted to catch up on you. You've been off
So th-
traveling. You've been doing a lot of conferences, Steve, right?
I have been far afield. We had a couple of great events in London. We had a Flowtopia event, um, which was Value Stream Management Consortium's kind of meetup in London, which lines up with Fast Flow Conf, which is the Team Topologies conference, and both of which were excellent. One obviously more focused on value streams, but there's a lot of value stream talk in Fast Flow Conf, and so that actually corresponds pretty well with a couple of questions that our friend Miguel Diaz posed to us in a prior session that we have not got to. So this is a great chance to talk about team topologies and flow engineering and how they intersect. And I was lucky enough to run into Miguel at at both events, which was wonderful. So he was there, and we got to compare notes and talk about a bunch of things. So he remains in the trenches, putting flow engineering to work and reporting back, which is wonderful. Um, and
And I was just having to refresh my memory. Fast Flow Conference. I just looked it up. That's actually run by Manuel and Matthew from Team Topologies, right? So
it,
it's
it's it's kind of actually a fan conference that has luckily uh, got time on their calendar to contribute to. So it was actually started by, I think, team topology advocates, and they've made enough noise year one that year two, I think Manuel and Matthew were both able to make time to attend. I don't think Manuel could make year one, but I think
Mhm.
based on the reception and the lead time that was available this year, I think they were both able to block it out of their schedule. So it was great to have them obviously involved in the conference to the extent that they were. They each ran sessions, and then they were available for like panel conversations, and it was a great event. It was really really well attended. It was packed, and everyone's really excited about putting team topologies into practice. And you hear now, on year two, you hear kind of follow ups. So Fidelity, Rachel Warnicott was one of the speakers from Fidelity in year one, talking about a journey into team topologies. And now in year two, kind of a progress update, which was great to hear. Um, and
The question that you kicked us off here with, like, what's the relationship between flow engineering, say, and team topologies, or value stream mapping and team topologies, but even the title of the conference begs that question. Like, well, if it's about team topologies, why is it called Fast Flow Conference? And so,
mhm.
I think it's really at the crux of how would you summarize the relationship there, the meaning?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that if we step back to how does team topologies enable fast flow, I think that there's a lot of correlation with the things that we really find important for enabling flow. Like clarity is a massive aspect of team topologies, where the definition around what type of team are you, and what does that say about how you should serve customers and serve your colleagues, right? Serve your business. And what does that look like when you are collaborating with other teams, whether that is fully active and engaged, shoulder to shoulder interaction, or if that is, very standoff, um, as a service, sort of API driven interaction. And this has really come to a head recently in one of my clients. We've been doing a full reorg around value streams, and you can't do that without getting down to the team level and talking about who are the people who are going to be doing the work, and how are they going to be organized, and how are they going to be actually handing work back and forth to each other. Um, and so there's this essential, and you can't do that with just team topologies either. That's what I think is probably the key point here, is that at the team topologies level, if you're just defining teams, then you're not really getting to the level where there's delivery of value necessarily, or the entire end-to-end picture of what it takes to have flow, much less fast flow. And then fast flow really comes from the ability for that baton to be passed through each of those participants, each of the teams involved in creating and delivering that value, and having that be seamless and efficient and effective, and have that entire process be very clear and frictionless for everybody who's involved.
I was trying to remember, because we'd had very similar conversations at the Enterprise Technology Leadership. One of the new books that came out was Unbundling the Enterprise. I was just fishing around to see where I have it in my room here, not maybe within arm's reach.
Mine's not here either.
Unbundling the Enterprise, the Science of Happy Accidents, I believe, is the subtitle, which is about the modularization of the code base. Whereas I think you could argue that team topologies is about modularization of the organizational design, and that you need to be looking at organizational design, and that organizational design is within scope for engineering organizations, not something to be imposed from outside or accidental, or something that you just need to work with the existing structure, but that the organizational design, as a sort of broader name for the team topologies, determines the architecture of the systems that you build. This is Conway's law, and that's a key topic that they bring up in team topologies. But the whole point is that if you have not unbundled the enterprise, if the whole enterprise is bundled together, and if you have not separated your teams into distinct, stream-aligned teams or platform teams or whatever else, if they're all still bundled together in whatever way without those clear definitions on areas of responsibility, the coupling of those teams will require a coupling of the release process, a coupling of the escalation process. The whole team gets involved in the escalations and so forth, and that you end up being hamstrung by that big monolithic structure. And so one of the things we talked about with Steve Fishman, who's the author of Unbundling the Enterprise, was that it's like two dimensions, at least the way I think about it. The vertical dimension about what are the modules or what are the teams, and the horizontal dimensions like the flow going and so our book, Flow Engineering, primarily focused on that horizontal dimension, from idea through delivery. How do you reduce the lead time, make it as smooth as possible, and create the coherence of understanding? I really appreciated you starting here with clarity of who's the team and who are the stakeholders and what's their mode of interaction and so forth. Because I think one of our theses in the book was that if the team doesn't have a clear value that they're delivering, and they don't have clarity collectively on what are they doing, what are their responsibilities to each other and so forth, then you won't be able to get flow. And so that,
and I think that there's another aspect of clarity really in simplicity, and being able to kind of essentialize these things and say, what does this team really need to do to contribute and deliver value? Because we can all have end-to-end comprehensive full stack value streams that are dozens, if not hundreds of people, which, we know because of, all of the necessity to coordinate those people and keep them kind of actively engaged with the value creation process, that becomes an operational nightmare. There's too much necessary collaboration and communication in an extremely large team. And so if you say that we're just going to take our products and create value streams around those products, and we'll make a team that is in charge of that, the team becomes many dozens of people and starts, you just have that fall off that we've seen after 9, 10 people where your productivity just tanks and your ability to organize and manage the complexity of that organization just becomes unsustainable. And so what you really have to do is be very clear about what are the fundamental components of value that constitute the overall delivery of value. And I think that the unbundling is really an important aspect of that. Value can be a big thing that's delivered by small capabilities that add up to be a large and valuable whole. And if those things are decoupled, they can be delivered in parallel, they can be delivered by small teams that are highly focused, highly knowledgeable about their entire domain, right? The entire piece of the puzzle that they own. And if those interaction modes are very well defined and abstracted away, meaning that they don't require direct collaboration between individuals, then all of a sudden what you can do is operate at a much higher level of scale and complexity, or let's say complication, without incurring the penalties of coordination and collaboration that we don't want. The types of collaboration that are necessary but expensive and very mentally taxing, right? So a big part of this was, and this, I tried to put this together in my talk at FastFlow conference, basically looking at capabilities as the deliverables, these things that are sort of delivering value at runtime for a customer. And they are delivered by value streams. And those value streams are composed of teams that are composed themselves as types of teams focused on a specific operating model and interacting with other teams, ideally in a X as a service relationship, just pulling value and pulling resources, assets, capabilities from other teams. And this picture starts to build out of the intersection between unbundling the enterprise, team topologies, and flow engineering. And
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, just one thing that's coming to mind here is that this is, in some sense, this is just another design challenge, right? And so, again, not to be doing too much name dropping, right? But this wiring the winning organization and the whole the thesis there is that wireheads, engineers and so forth, who think about things through in more analytical ways, think about assembling inanimate objects and so forth, that knowledge can be transported or transferred over into the social design sphere. And that this whole challenge of, you've got these people who choose to work with computers primarily instead of people, right? And so there's a strong tendency for people who are very technically oriented to maybe not have the same kind of skill or sophistication with the psychological, interactions, mode of interaction, guiding, inspiring, and so forth, as all the liberal arts majors say. But the liberal arts majors, they may have real good skill in telling a compelling story and so forth, but not be nearly so good at the detailed
Mm-hmm.
work required to really make an organization thrive. And so you've got these very detail-oriented people who really want, the engineering crew, who really want clarity, real boundaries, optimization, and so forth. And applying that mindset to designing patterns of communication, patterns of interaction, expectations within teams. And in a sense, I find that to be a very, very hopeful message, right? Because otherwise there's a little bit of a, this business technology divide. It's also a little bit like a liberal arts major versus engineering major divide, right? Like the liberal arts majors end up, in leadership and management positions, making big, fairly impactful decisions, large amount of money flying through. Engineering folks it's really optimized typically for an individual contributor kind of role where you're just
Hmm.
managing all the details. You've got a mind that can keep track of the details. You have an incredibly sophisticated technical product. I'm just assuming that whoever's listening to this probably has some significant complexity and sophistication in the products that they're managing. And so you need very, very smart people down at the edges in the digital trenches, so to speak, building that stuff. And so you've got all these detail-oriented people, and there can be a gap, I think, in terms of psychology, in terms of the way that these two groups think and interact, but that you can bridge that gap. And in fact, you must bridge that gap. If you want to be an
Hmm.
effective high-level leader, you must go to the Gemba. You must go down to checking out the details of what's going on. And if you want to be an effective if you want to enable truly effective engineering, you need to have an effective organization, which means that if you're really going to take responsibility for the thriving of your product and the technology, whatever else, you need to be working your way up through the ranks of the organization to have greater and greater influence, and that the problem domain changes dramatically, because at that point you're not working with servers
Hmm.
who put out very explicit debug logs. You're dealing with humans who are not transparent, perhaps, about their intentions and motivations, and you're just having to guess and hypothesize in this very messy domain of human psychology and politics and whatever else. But that you can reconcile that, and so this idea that taking principles like modularization, applying them to organizational design, applying them to communication patterns. Anyway, I find it hopeful.
Yeah, I think it really is. One of the things I think that is absolutely essential for bridging that gap is universal language, right? Like a sense that we can speak the same language and communicate effectively about the things that matter most to us, and reconcile the gaps in our perspectives, or let's say our respective domains or scopes of attention, right? So what you have in the higher levels of organizations is a high value on abstraction and large scale, the distant time horizon, for instance, and lower down in the organization, problem solving and creating products and services, engineering solutions is really about getting the details correct. But that's just a question of relative scope, right? Are we solving a problem in the macro or the micro?
Right.
And there's no conflict there. There's just a reconciliation of what scope are we talking about in this conversation, and how do we talk about the same scope? And we can, as a group, we can agree, okay, let's talk long term. Let's talk today. Um, let's talk about this specific challenge. And maybe we zoom out from that specific challenge to recognize that it's part of a pattern, a repeated pattern, or a seasonal pattern, some circumstantial pattern. And so the ability to traverse between the macro and the micro and bring people with you, meet people where they are and bring people with you, I think is absolutely critical. And I think that's what we're seeing now is a level of sophistication across these domains where we're starting to very clearly recognize that there is isomorphic, meaning you can apply the same model, thinking, patterns, principles from this domain to another domain, or from this scale to this other scale. We can now do that across all these different domains: team science and organization, communication patterns, and collaborative patterns, ideas of dependency from a technical perspective and an organizational perspective, um, APIs and interfaces, applying not only to technical domains, but interpersonal domains. Right? We have all the same needs. You need
APIs.
clarity, you need protocols, you need common language, specifications, right? And so I think it's a very, very exciting time because that is an engineering challenge and a liberal arts challenge. To say, what are the actual patterns here? How is that? And this is part of what I'm really excited about with networking science and networking history, the work that I'm doing with John Rouser at Cisco. We're saying we see all these challenges that were solved by software defined networking represented in current day enterprises,
Hmm.
and they're unsolved in current day enterprises.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the same solutions seem to be applicable.
Hmm.
So I think that this might be just esoteric, but I have very strong um, evidence that there is so much value in this cross domain
Yeah.
application of challenge and
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah. That makes sense. One thing that comes to mind when you talk about these different time horizons, because I think you're absolutely right. Like we talk about different scales, different scopes of the company, and so forth. But you're also talking about different time scales, and one of the things that gets into is this concept that's really critical in the lean thinking, especially the Toyota Kata world, is um, clearly differentiating between what you're imagining might be possible in the future and what's actually true right now. And that typically
Mm-hmm.
the mind doesn't do a great job of differentiating those two. And so that if you are responsible for long term vision stuff, um, you might see the vision quite clearly in your head and assume and believe that there's a way to close the gap between where we are at present and that vision,
Mm-hmm.
but that an enormous amount of misunderstandings come from not navigating that correctly. Like we make effectively a lot of what we do in business is we make promises. We try to make
Mm-hmm.
promises that people will buy, and then we try to fulfill those promises. And so a lot of business is about projecting a positive future for a particular customer, especially in consulting, and then struggling to make that a reality. And so the Toyota Cut approach is really, really helpful here because it breaks that large scale granularity of this is the target condition we're looking for, uh, and this is the current condition now. Breaks it down into small, finite, 1 day increments, right? And so it's a big
Mm-hmm.
priority for us at AutoRabbit is rolling out the Toyota Kata as a way to think more rigorously about small scale experiments. That what you're doing is you're not just doing work, and you're the flow of what you're doing, is not just delivering things where we know they're going
Mm-hmm.
to work. It's a flow of experiments. It's a flow that is operating in a domain of significant uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think because of the pace of business increasing, technology's increased the pace of business dramatically. Um, the future comes real fast, and the decisions that you make now have you know effects that you can see within a span of a few years or months or weeks or days or hours or whatever else, and
Yeah.
so the initial design becomes critically important. You're designing the future.
Yeah. And there's something, I'm reminded of that phrase, like make no small plans. And
Mm.
I think there's a challenge of engineering where we're very comfortable with incremental one foot in front of the other. We have a problem, solve the next problem. And it can be very difficult to work backwards in a sense that is highly ambitious, particularly because engineers tend to be very attached to the solution that they are in charge of in its form today, right? They're very conscious of these are the things that are on fire today. This is the technical debt that I'm saddled with, and being tasked with this different scope or this different time horizon of large scale, ambitious, swing for the fences pattern of thinking. Um, I find talking to clients that they immediately will try to work that backwards into the components that they see on the desk in front of them, right? The current scope of what they're responsible for, and how do I get that to this big ambitious thing instead of necessarily breaking that down back to, okay, well, that's a big goal. What would need to be true for that to be true?
Mhm.
How do we break that down and modularize that into specific domains or areas that can be decoupled somewhat, and then divide and conquer that big problem, and try to use what we have rather than uh, you know evolve what we have in that general direction, like very incrementally. And I think that the jury's out, perhaps, about whether you can incrementally work your way towards a goal, or you have to kind of work backwards, essentially, to do the best job of that, and say, forget what we have now. We'll use what we have if we can, but focus more on what we're trying to achieve and break that down, modularize that problem, and try to leverage the capabilities that we have and spin up new ones or change what we're doing to meet that goal in the future. Skate to where the puck is going rather than continue doing a great job with puck handling and moving the puck around and doing all the other tactical things. And this idea of strategy and strategic deployment, I think, is still an area that engineers and engineering in general is becoming accustomed to, rather than something that has been a native capability from the very start. Because I don't know, we're kind of used to applying engineering to known domains, building a bridge, building, traffic control systems, doing very technical things that have been done for a very long time, not necessarily thinking about, well, ignore what's possible today. What would need to be true for us to achieve the future tomorrow, the future that we imagine? And I think that we are getting to a point where those things are starting to converge. We're now convinced that we can do incredible things with technology. And we're also now, I think, convinced that people are the secret to that. And a variety of perspectives are the secret to that. Bringing your business and technology people together is the secret to better technical outcomes and better business outcomes. And bring us back to the very beginning, that requires common vision, common language,
mm-hmm.
effective collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's probably a good, healthy dose of content for this session's podcast. So, Steve, really happy to have a chance to reconnect, sharing thoughts on the unification of team topologies and flow engineering, and Steve's experience at FastFlowCon in England recently. So, thank you, everybody, so much for joining.
Thank you. See you soon.